I never imagined my life would implode on a Tuesday morning. But there I was, standing in the gleaming lobby of Horizon Pharmaceuticals, watching my mother-in-law march through the revolving doors like an avenging angel in a Chanel suit. The security guard didn't even have time to ask for her ID before she stormed past him, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor like a timer counting down to my destruction. In her hand was a thick manila envelope that would shatter everything I'd spent 5 years building. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. "Where is Robert Chen?" she demanded, her voice echoing through the lobby. "I need to speak to him immediately about his head of research and development. That would be me." Sarah Mitchell, now Sarah Chen, the woman who had just been nominated for the company's Innovation Excellence Award. The woman who had met and fallen in love with her son over late-night lab research and coffee runs. The woman she had never thought was good enough for her precious boy, despite my doctorate from Stanford and my patents in biotechnology. I stood frozen behind my sleek glass desk, my morning coffee growing cold beside my keyboard, as I watched my carefully constructed world begin to crumble. But let me back up. You need to understand how we got here. 3 weeks earlier, our lives had been different. Not perfect, but manageable. I had just wrapped up a breakthrough project on sustainable pharmaceutical packaging that would revolutionize how we transported temperature-sensitive medications to developing countries. The board was impressed, my team was celebrating, and even my usually distant mother-in-law, Victoria Chen, had seemed almost approving during our monthly family dinner. The Chen family wasn't just wealthy, they were Boston royalty. Their name graced hospital wings and university buildings. Victoria's late husband had been a legendary pharmaceutical pioneer, and she guarded his legacy like a dragon hoarding gold. When her only son Robert fell in love with a scholarship student, her words, not mine, she had made her disapproval, clear but subtle. There were always little comments, slight digs about my middle-class background, my father's job as a high school chemistry teacher, my mother's career as a nurse. But I had learned to navigate those waters. Robert and I had built a life together, bought a beautiful brownstone in Beacon Hill, though notably smaller than his family home, and found our rhythm. I threw myself into my work at Horizon Pharmaceuticals, determined to prove my worth not just through my marriage, but through my own achievements. The morning everything changed started normally enough. I had arrived early at the office. My team was preparing for our final presentation on the sustainable packaging project, and my assistant Michael had just brought in my morning coffee, organic Ethiopian blend, 1 splash of almond milk, no sugar, a habit I'd picked up from Robert. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a text from my sister-in-law, Grace. "Mom's on the warpath. She's been in her study all night. Watch out." I remembered staring at those words, feeling a slight tremor in my hands. Grace had always been my ally in the family, the only one who seemed to truly accept me from the beginning. She had a way of sensing when her mother was about to create chaos. But even with Grace's warning, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Victoria Chen didn't just show up at my workplace, she orchestrated a spectacle. The lobby of Horizon Pharmaceuticals had always been impressive, with its soaring ceilings and wall of windows overlooking the Boston Harbor. That morning, the sunrise was painting everything in shades of gold and rose, making the space look almost ethereal. I had been heading to the elevator, my mind on the morning's meetings, when I heard the commotion. Mrs. Chen. Our security guard, Dave, had worked here for 20 years and knew everyone. "You need to sign in." "I most certainly will not." Victoria's voice cut through the morning quiet like a blade. "My family has been major shareholders in this company since before you were born. Now, where is Robert?" I turned slowly, my heart pounding. Robert, my husband, was the chief financial officer of Horizon, his office on the top floor with the other executives. I was on the R&D floor, deliberately keeping our professional lives separate. But somehow, I knew she wasn't really looking for him. She was looking for me. Victoria stood in the center of the lobby, impeccably dressed in a steel gray Chanel suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, her posture rigid with purpose. The manila envelope in her hand seemed to pulse with menace. Our eyes met across the lobby, and in that moment, I saw something in her expression that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just her usual disapproval or disdain. This was different. This was triumph. "Ah, Sarah," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent lobby. "Perfect. We can handle this now, before you have a chance to delete any more files." Delete files? My mind raced, trying to understand what she was talking about. Around us, people had stopped pretending to go about their business and were openly staring. Through the glass walls, I could see more employees gathering, drawn by the unusual scene unfolding in our typically quiet lobby. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and did what any scientist would do. I tried to approach the situation. Logically, "Victoria," I said, keeping my voice steady, "why don't we take this somewhere private?" She smiled, but it wasn't a kind expression. "Oh, no, dear. I think we've had quite enough privacy. That's rather been the problem, hasn't it?" The elevator dinged behind me, and I heard familiar footsteps. Robert. I didn't need to turn around to know it was him. I could sense his presence, feel the shift in the air as he took in the scene before him. "Mother?" His voice was confused, concerned. "What are you doing here?" Victoria held up the manila envelope like a weapon. "Protecting our family's legacy, darling. Something I should have done 2 years ago, before she had a chance to steal from us." And that's when my Tuesday morning turned into a nightmare. The lobby of Horizon Pharmaceuticals had suddenly become a theater, and I was the unwitting star of a drama I hadn't even known was being written. As Victoria Chen prepared to deliver her accusation, I couldn't help but wonder, how had we gotten here? And more importantly, how would I survive what was coming next? The signs had been there, small cracks in the foundation that I'd chosen to ignore. A week before Victoria's dramatic entrance at Horizon, I had noticed subtle changes in how our family dynamics were shifting. It started with the quarterly board meeting. As head of R&D, I regularly presented our department's progress. But that Thursday, something felt off. Bernard Winston, one of our oldest board members and a close friend of the Chen family, kept giving me strange looks during my presentation on our latest breakthrough in biodegradable pharmaceutical packaging. "Fascinating work, Dr. Chen," he had said afterward, his voice carrying an odd undertone. "Remarkably similar to some old projects from Pharmatech, wouldn't you say?" Pharmatech. The company Victoria's late husband had founded, later merged with Horizon. I had brushed off the comment, but it stuck with me, a splinter in my mind. That same evening, at home, I found Robert in his study, surrounded by old company files. He looked troubled, distracted. "Everything okay?" I had asked, setting down a cup of tea on his desk. "Just some old research papers Mother asked me to look through," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "From Dad's personal archives." I remembered feeling a chill then, though I couldn't explain why. "Anything interesting?" "Not sure yet." He had smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry about it." But I did worry, especially when Grace called me the next day, her voice hushed despite being alone in her art gallery. "Sarah, something's weird. Mom's been meeting with Uncle James. James Chen, Victoria's brother-in-law and the family's personal investigator, the man they called whenever there was a situation to handle. He was at the house yesterday when I dropped by," Grace continued. "They were in Dad's old study, going through his research journals. Mom shut the door as soon as she saw me. I stood in my office, looking out over the Boston Harbor, watching boats cut through the morning fog. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maybe she's just feeling nostalgic? Grace's laugh was bitter. Mom doesn't do nostalgic, Sarah. You know that. Just be careful, okay? The owie. Warning signs continued to pile up. Michael, my assistant, mentioned that someone from IT had been asking about access logs to our research database. Carmen from the legal department accidentally left a document about intellectual property theft open on the shared printer. Then there was the dinner party at the Chen family mansion 3 nights ago. Victoria had insisted on hosting, something she hadn't done since Robert and I announced our engagement 2 years ago. The mansion was exactly as I remembered it. Imposing, elegant, cold. Like its owner. But something had changed in the study where we gathered for pre-dinner drinks. The portrait of Richard Chen, Victoria's late husband, had been moved to a more prominent position. Beneath it, spread out on his antique desk, were folders I recognized from our company archives. Just organizing some of Richard's old work, Victoria had said, catching me looking. Her smile was sharp as cut glass. He was so brilliant, you know, always ahead of his time, especially with his packaging innovations. My stomach had lurched. The way she emphasized packaging made my skin crawl. Later that evening, I overheard her talking to Bernard Winston in the library. The similarities are undeniable, he was saying, but we need concrete proof. Oh, we'll have that soon enough, Victoria had replied. James is very thorough. I should have confronted her then, should have demanded to know what she was implying. Instead, I did what I always did. Tried to be the bigger person, to prove I deserved my place in this family. The next day at work, I noticed small changes in how people treated me, whispers that stopped when I entered the break room. Colleagues suddenly too busy for our usual lunch meetings. Even my own team seemed on edge, though they tried to hide it. I buried myself in work, focusing on our upcoming presentation to potential investors. Our sustainable packaging project was revolutionary, a system that could maintain temperature control for vital medications using biodegradable materials, cutting both costs and environmental impact. It was my pride and joy, the culmination of 2 years of research. The night before Victoria's dramatic appearance, I stayed late at the office, reviewing everything one final time. That's when I noticed someone had accessed my computer files. Recently, someone using Robert's security credentials. My hands shook as I dug deeper into the access logs. Multiple file transfers, all to an external drive, all under Robert's login. But my husband had been in New York at a finance conference for the past 3 days. I called him immediately. Did you authorize anyone to access my research files? The pause before his answer was too long. Mother mentioned needing some historical data for the company archives. I didn't think it would be a problem. Robert, I said, my voice barely a whisper. What's really going on? Another pause. I don't know, Sarah, but Mother's convinced she's found something. She's been talking to the board members, showing them some old research from Dad's files. I sat in my darkened office, staring at the cityscape beyond my window as Robert's words faded into background noise. Everything suddenly made horrible sense. The whispers, the strange looks, Victoria's cryptic comments about Richard's packaging innovations. She was building a case against me. But for what? I spent that night going through every piece of research, every note, every design. My work was original, inspired by existing technologies, yes, but fundamentally new. I had followed every protocol, documented every step. I had nothing to hide. But as I drove to work the next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that none of that would matter. Victoria Chen had decided I was a threat to her family's legacy, and she was about to make her move. I just hadn't expected it to be so public, so devastating. As I stood in that lobby the next morning, watching her approach with that manila envelope, I realized all these warning signs had been leading to this moment. Like a perfectly orchestrated symphony reaching its crescendo, Victoria had planned every detail. The only question was, what evidence did she think she had in that envelope? And more importantly, how would I prove my innocence when my own husband had unknowingly helped build the case against me? That morning at Horizon Pharmaceuticals started deceptively peaceful. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across my pristine lab space. I had arrived early, determined to prepare for our investor presentation. Scheduled for 10 a.m., our sustainable packaging prototype sat on my desk, elegant in its simplicity, revolutionary in its potential. Dr. Chen? Michael appeared at my door, holding a steaming cup of coffee and a stack of presentation materials. The conference room is set up, and I've confirmed all 5 investors will be attending. I smiled, grateful for his efficiency. Thanks, Michael. How's the mood upstairs? He hesitated, just for a second. Mr. Winston asked if you'd join the pre-meeting briefing. Said it was important. Bernard Winston's request was unusual. Pre-meeting briefings were typically handled by Robert and the financial team. Still, I gathered my materials, straightened my charcoal gray suit, and headed to the executive floor. The elevator ride gave me time to appreciate how far I'd come. 5 years ago, I was just another researcher, burning midnight oil in the lab. Now, I was about to present a project that could change how life-saving medications reached developing nations. If successful, our sustainable packaging would cut transportation costs by 40%, while extending medication viability by weeks. The executive floor was quiet when I arrived, most offices still dark. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see Bernard Winston sitting alone, reviewing documents spread across the mahogany table. Sarah. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. Thank you for coming early. Of course. I took a seat across from him, noting how he subtly gathered the papers closer. Is everything all right with the presentation schedule? Bernard removed his glasses, polishing them slowly with his pocket square. You know, I knew Richard Chen for 30 years. Brilliant man. Dedicated his life to making medication more accessible to those who needed it most. My stomach tightened. He was a pioneer in the field. Yes, he was. Bernard replaced his glasses, which is why I found it fascinating when I came across some of his old research notes last week, particularly his work on sustainable packaging from 1992. The air in the room seemed to thin. I wasn't aware Richard had worked on similar projects. No. Bernard's voice was soft. I suppose you weren't. Before I could respond, the door opened. Robert walked in, followed by our chief legal officer, Patricia Martinez. Neither looked surprised to see me. Sarah? Patricia's tone was professionally neutral. I hope we're not interrupting. Not at all, Bernard stood. I was just sharing some interesting historical context with Sarah. Robert wouldn't meet my eyes as he took a seat. I watched my husband, the man I'd built a life with, pull out his laptop and begin typing, as if this were any other morning meeting. The investors will be here in 2 hours, Patricia said, arranging folders before her. Before that, we need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Grace. Mom left the house an hour ago. Looked like she was on a mission. Call me. I silenced the phone, focusing on Patricia. What concerns? There have been questions about the originality of certain elements in your sustainable packaging design. Patricia's words fell like stones in still water. The board has received documentation suggesting possible similarities to previous research. Previous research? I kept my voice steady. All our work has been thoroughly documented and peer-reviewed. Every design element is original. Is it? Bernard slid a folder across the table. Take a look. Inside were photocopies of old technical drawings, notes in faded ink, and chemical formulas that looked disturbingly familiar. The dates on the pages, 1992-1994. The signature at the bottom of each page, Richard Chen. "This is impossible," I whispered, flipping through the pages. The basic concepts were similar, yes, but the technology we'd developed was fundamentally different. "These are preliminary sketches at best. Our system uses completely new materials, advanced temperature control methods that didn't even exist in the 90s. "Sarah," Robert finally spoke, his voice strained. "Maybe we should postpone the investor presentation. Give us time to sort this out." I stared at my husband, realization dawning. "You knew about this. That's why you gave Victoria access to my files." The conference room fell silent. Through the glass walls, I could see the office coming to life. Employees arriving, coffee brewing, another ordinary day at Horizon Pharmaceuticals. Except nothing about this day would be ordinary. "We have a responsibility to our shareholders," Patricia said, her tone gentler now. "If there's any question about the originality of this research—" "There is no question," I interrupted, standing up. "I can walk you through every innovation, every breakthrough. This project is the result of 2 years of original research. Yes, we built on existing knowledge. That's how science works. But our technology is completely new." Bernard sighed. "Sarah, no one is accusing you of anything. We just need to be certain." The door opened again. This time it was Michael, looking anxious. "Dr. Chen? Mrs. Victoria Chen is here. She's asking for you, and she seems quite upset." In that moment, looking at the faces around me, Bernard's careful neutrality, Patricia's professional concern, Robert's guilty avoidance, I understood. This meeting wasn't a briefing. It was a preemptive damage control session. "I should get back to my lab," I said, gathering my things. "The investors will be here soon." "Sarah," Robert reached for my hand. "Please, let's handle this as a family." I pulled away. "Isn't that exactly what you've been doing? Handling me as a family?" As I walked out of the conference room, I felt strangely calm. The storm was coming. I could feel it in the air, see it in the way people quickly looked away as I passed. But I knew my work, knew every late night, every failed experiment, every breakthrough that led to our final design. Victoria Chen might have Richard's old research notes, but I had the truth. I just had to prove it. I didn't know then that I had less than 15 minutes before Victoria would walk through those lobby doors, ready to destroy everything I'd built. 15 minutes of calm before my professional and personal lives would collide in spectacular fashion. The quiet before the storm was about to end. The click of Victoria's heels against the marble lobby floor was like a countdown. I stood my ground. As she approached, that manila envelope clutched in her manicured hands. Behind me, I could hear the elevator doors opening, more footsteps, probably Robert and the others from the conference room. But what happened next wasn't what any of us expected. Victoria didn't stop at my desk. Instead, she walked straight past me to the security desk where Dave sat watching the scene unfold. She placed a USB drive next to his monitor. "Please," her voice carried across the lobby, "display this on all screens, now." "Ma'am, I can't just—" Dave began. "I am a major shareholder of this company," Victoria cut him off, "and what I'm about to show concerns the security of millions of dollars in intellectual property." Before anyone could stop her, she reached over and plugged the drive into Dave's computer. Seconds later, every screen in the lobby, the massive welcome display, the security monitors, even the digital directories, flickered to life with the same image. It was security footage, dated 3 months ago. The timestamp showed 2:47 m. My blood ran cold as I watched myself entering the building, using my keycard. But I hadn't been here that night. I'd been at home, sleeping next to Robert. I had the fitness tracker data to prove it. Keep watching, Victoria commanded as murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. The footage showed me entering the secure server room, connecting a laptop, downloading files. The image was grainy but clear enough to show the person was wearing my distinctive red blazer, the one Victoria herself had given me last Christmas. "Stop this," Robert's voice rang out. He had finally reached us, face flushed. "Mother, this isn't the way." "The way?" Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "The way to what, Robert? To protect our family's legacy? To prevent your wife from stealing your father's life's work?" More footage began playing. Different angles, different nights, all showing someone who looked remarkably like me accessing secure areas, downloading data. "I can explain this," I started, but Victoria wasn't finished. She turned to address the growing crowd of employees. "Your head of research and development has been systematically stealing proprietary information, not just recent files, but historical data, patents, research that my husband spent decades developing." "That's impossible," I said, my voice stronger. "Now. I've never—" "Then explain this." Victoria pulled papers from her envelope, thrusting them at the nearest person, who happened to be Patricia Martinez. Transfer records, large sums moving through offshore accounts, all traced back to Dr. Sarah Chen. Patricia's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. I caught glimpses of bank statements, transaction records, all with my name. All expertly forged. "And the coup de grace," Victoria continued, pressing a button on her phone. The screens changed again, this time showing emails, dozens of them, from my company account to an address I didn't recognize. Emails discussing the sale of research data, arranging payments, planning the systematic theft of Horizon's intellectual property. The lobby had gone deathly quiet. I could feel every eye on me, judgment and suspicion radiating from all sides. Then a new voice cut through the silence. "Those emails are fake." Everyone turned. Michael, my assistant, stood by his desk, his hands shaking, but his voice firm. "What did you say?" Victoria's tone could have frozen fire. Michael swallowed hard but continued. "The emails, they're forgeries. Look at the timestamps. Dr. Chen was presenting at the Boston Medical Conference when these were supposedly sent. I have the video recordings to prove it." For the first time, Victoria's composure cracked. She hadn't expected resistance from this quarter, but Michael wasn't finished. "And that security footage? Dr. Chen has a broken toe in those videos, but she didn't break her toe until last month. I remember because I had to reschedule all her lab work." A ripple of uncertainty went through the crowd. I stared at Michael, this quiet young man who'd worked with me for 2 years, now standing up to one of Boston's most powerful women. Victoria recovered quickly. "A few scheduling discrepancies don't negate the financial evidence. The offshore accounts are also suspicious," Patricia interrupted, still reviewing the documents. "These transaction dates. Sarah was in Singapore giving a keynote speech when this account was supposedly opened in Geneva. The tide was turning. I could feel it in the shifting energy of the room. But Victoria had one more card to play. She pulled out her phone again, dialing quickly. "James? Yes, bring them in." The lobby doors opened once more. James Chen entered, followed by 2 men in dark suits, private investigators by their look. "We have proof," James announced, "that Dr. Chen has been meeting with representatives from our competitors, planning to sell Richard's sustainable packaging technology to the highest bidder." He nodded to one of the suits who stepped forward with a laptop. "We have surveillance photos, recorded conversations." "That's enough," Robert's voice cracked like a whip. He stood between me and his mother, shoulders straight, jaw set. "Robert," Victoria pleaded, "you've seen the evidence. Your father's work is safe," Robert finished. "Because I've known about these accusations for weeks, and I've been conducting my own investigation." He turned to James. Did my mother tell you she hired someone to break into our house 3 months ago? To plant evidence on Sarah's laptop? Victoria went pale. How did you— The security company called me, Robert said quietly. They caught it all on camera, just like they caught someone wearing Sarah's clothes entering this building at night. Someone who looks remarkably like the actress Mother hired last month through her charity foundation. The silence in the lobby was absolute. Victoria Chen, the family matriarch, the untouchable queen of Boston society, stood frozen as her carefully constructed plan crumbled around her. But this wasn't the end. It was barely the beginning. Because at that moment, Bernard Winston stepped forward, clutching a file I hadn't seen before. His face was grim as he addressed Victoria. I think, he said slowly, we need to discuss the real reason you're so interested in this sustainable packaging project, and why you've been secretly meeting with our competitors yourself. The disruption Victoria had planned had backfired spectacularly. But as I watched Bernard open his file, I realized we were about to uncover something far bigger than a mother-in-law's attempt to discredit her daughter-in-law. The real storm was just beginning. Bernard Winston's words hung in the air like smoke. He opened the file deliberately, each movement calculated for maximum impact. The lobby of Horizon Pharmaceuticals had become an impromptu courtroom, with employees pressed against the walls, watching the drama unfold. 3 weeks ago, Bernard began, his voice carrying across the hushed space, I received an interesting call from Pharmatech's CEO. He wanted to discuss a potential merger, one that would give them exclusive rights to our sustainable packaging technology. Victoria's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. A twitch at the corner of her mouth, a tightening around her eyes. The strange thing was, Bernard continued, he seemed to think the deal was already in motion. He mentioned meetings with a major Horizon shareholder, private discussions about intellectual property rights. He pulled out a photograph and held it up. It showed Victoria leaving an upscale restaurant with Pharmatech's CEO, both looking conspiratorial. You've been trying to sell the company out from under us, Bernard accused. But you needed to discredit the current research team first, particularly the person who developed the technology you wanted to control. Victoria's laugh was brittle. That's absurd. I'm protecting our family's interests. This woman, she jabbed a finger in my direction, has been stealing my husband's research piece by piece. No. A new voice joined the fray. Grace Chen pushed through the crowd, clutching a weathered leather journal. She hasn't been stealing anything, Mother, and I can prove it. My sister-in-law's hands shook as she opened the journal. This is Dad's personal research diary. The one you keep locked in his study. The one you didn't know he gave me a key to before he died. Victoria's face went ash white. Grace, don't— October 15th, 1992, Grace read aloud. My initial attempts at sustainable packaging have failed. The technology simply doesn't exist yet to achieve what I envision. Perhaps in 20-30 years, someone will succeed where I could not. She flipped forward several pages. March 3rd, 1993. The board wants me to continue the packaging project, but I know it's a dead end with current materials. I'm documenting everything so that future researchers will know what doesn't work. Maybe my son's generation will have the tools to make this dream a reality. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Victoria stood rigid, her carefully constructed accusation crumbling around her. But Grace wasn't finished. She pulled out a sealed envelope from between the journal's pages. And this? This is dated 2 months before Dad died. Addressed to my future daughter-in-law when the time is right. Robert stepped forward, his face a mix of shock and revelation. Grace, how long have you had this? Since the day Sarah announced her sustainable packaging breakthrough, Grace admitted. I've been waiting for the right moment. I guess that's now. She handed me the envelope with trembling fingers. The paper was aged, the seal slightly yellowed. I opened it carefully, aware of every eye in the lobby watching. Dear daughter, I read aloud, my voice catching. If you're reading this, it means you've accomplished something I never could. The sustainable packaging project was my greatest dream and my greatest failure. The science of my time wasn't advanced enough to make it work. I had to pause, gathering myself before continuing. But you who I'll never meet but who my son chose to love, you've done it. Grace tells me you're brilliant, dedicated, exactly the kind of scientist I always hoped would join our family. The research is yours. The breakthrough is yours. Don't let anyone tell you differently. The letter was signed simply, Richard Chen. Victoria swayed slightly, reaching for the nearest desk to steady herself. That's not possible. Richard would never— He did, Mother, Robert said softly. Because Dad cared more about scientific progress than family pride. He wanted his work to help people, not sit locked in a vault as some kind of legacy. Bernard cleared his throat. There's more. He pulled another document from his file. Your meetings with Pharmatech weren't just about selling them the technology. You were planning to frame Sarah for corporate espionage, have her arrested, and then swoop in to save the company by facilitating a merger. The evidence is quite detailed, Patricia Martinez added, holding up her phone. The offshore accounts you created in Sarah's name, the actress you hired to impersonate her, the fabricated security footage, it's all here. Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. You don't understand, she hissed. This company was Richard's life, his legacy. I couldn't let some outsider waltz in and take credit for his work. The only person trying to steal anything, Robert said firmly, is you, Mother. You were willing to destroy Sarah's career, her reputation, maybe even send her to prison, all to maintain control over something that was never yours to begin with. Security officers had quietly appeared at the lobby entrances. Patricia nodded to them, and they began moving forward. Mrs. Chen, Patricia said formally, the board will need to discuss this matter immediately, and I believe the SEC will be very interested in your recent activities. As the security officers approached, Victoria straightened her spine, trying to salvage what dignity she could. Everything I did was for this family. No, Mother, Grace said sadly. Everything you did was for yourself. I watched as they led Victoria away, her Chanel suit still immaculate, her head held high even in defeat. The manila envelope that had seemed so threatening earlier lay forgotten on the floor, its forged contents now worthless. Robert turned to me, his eyes full of apology and love. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I knew Mother was planning something, but I never imagined— I cut him off with a shake of my head. You tried to warn me, in your way? And you were gathering evidence to protect me. Still, he sighed. My own mother. Bernard cleared his throat. The investors will be here in an hour. Sarah, if you're up to it, I think they'd still very much like to see your presentation. I looked around the lobby. The employees were dispersing, whispering among themselves. Michael was already at his desk, presumably rescheduling the day's meetings. Grace clutched our father-in-law's journal, looking both relieved and exhausted. Yes, I said firmly. The presentation will go on. This technology can help too many people to let it be derailed by personal drama. As we headed toward the elevators, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass walls. I looked surprisingly composed for someone who had just weathered such a storm. But then again, I had something Victoria never did: the truth on my side. The accusation had failed. But as I would soon learn, this was only the beginning of a much larger conspiracy that would shake Horizon Pharmaceuticals to its core. The aftermath of Victoria's arrest transformed Horizon Pharmaceuticals' pristine lobby into a scene of barely controlled chaos. As security escorted her to their office to await the SEC representatives, the professional veneer of our corporate environment cracked like thin ice. Everyone, please return to your workstations, Patricia Martinez called out, trying to restore order. But it was like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. Employees huddled in clusters, smartphones discreetly recording everything. I caught fragments of hurried conversations. Did you see her face when they read that letter? The SEC is coming? Who else was involved? What about the merger talks? Then the press arrived. I was discussing emergency PR strategies with Patricia. When the first reporters pushed through the revolving doors, Jane Martinez from the Boston Globe, followed by 2 local TV crews. How did they get here so fast? Robert muttered. Grace, still clutching her father's journal, paled. Mother, she must have tipped them off. She expected this to go very differently. The reporters converged on us like sharks scenting blood. Camera lights blazed, microphones thrust forward. Dr. Chen! Is it true Victoria Chen attempted to frame you for corporate espionage? Mr. Chen, will you be pressing charges against your mother? Ms. Martinez, how long has the board known about the illegal merger negotiations? Before anyone could respond, the elevator doors opened. Bernard Winston emerged with 3 stern-looking individuals in dark suits. SEC's here, Patricia whispered. Robert, Sarah, we need to move this upstairs now. But as we tried to make our way to the elevator, all hell broke loose. James Chen, Victoria's brother-in-law who had skulked to the background during her downfall, suddenly shouted, "Wait! There's something everyone needs to know." He held up his phone, his hand shaking. I have proof that Sarah Chen isn't as innocent as she appears. The Sustainable Packaging Project? It's based on stolen research, but not from Richard Chen. The reporters swung their cameras toward James like weather vanes in a storm. 2 years ago, he continued, his voice carrying across the lobby, Dr. Chen attended a conference in Singapore, the same conference where Pharmatech's chief scientist mysteriously lost his prototype designs. My head spun. What? I have security footage, James insisted. And witnesses. Sarah Chen met with Dr. Liu from Pharmatech in his hotel room. The next day, his research disappeared. The lobby erupted. Reporters fired questions like bullets. Employees gasped and whispered. The SEC agents exchanged meaningful looks. That's impossible, I started to say, but Robert grabbed my arm. Sarah, he whispered urgently. Please tell me you didn't. I jerked away from him, stunned. You actually believe this? Of course not, but there is no but, Robert. I've never stolen anything in my life. Michael suddenly appeared at my side, laptop in hand. Dr. Chen never met with Dr. Liu in Singapore. All eyes turned to my assistant. She couldn't have, Michael continued, his voice stronger now, because she was giving a live-streamed keynote speech at the exact time James is talking about. I have the video right here. He turned his laptop around, showing the timestamp and video feed. But James wasn't finished. Check her phone records. The calls to Pharmatech are completely fabricated, a new voice cut through the chaos. Everyone turned to see a tall woman in a crisp FBI windbreaker stride through the lobby doors. Agent Diana Foster, her badge gleaming. James Chen. She announced, "We have a warrant for your arrest for conspiracy to commit corporate fraud and evidence tampering." The chaos reached new heights. More cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Employees pressed against the walls, recording everything on their phones. Mr. Chen has been working with corporate espionage rings across Asia, Agent Foster continued, as 2 more FBI agents moved to flank James. He's been selling corporate secrets to the highest bidder for years, including, ironically, to Pharmatech. James made a break for the emergency exit, but security cut him off. As the FBI agents handcuffed him, he shouted, "Victoria knew. She was part of it all. Ask her about the real Pharmatech deal." The SEC agents exchanged looks and hurried toward the security office where Victoria was being held. "Mrs. Martinez," Agent Foster addressed Patricia, "we'll need to see all company records immediately. This investigation just got a lot bigger." Patricia nodded grimly. "Of course. Robert, Sarah, we need damage control. Now. But before we could move, Grace gasped. She had been flipping through her father's journal again. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Look at this." She held out the journal, open to an entry dated just weeks before Richard Chen's death. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "James and Victoria are up to something. The missing research, the mysterious meetings. I've trusted my wife and my brother for 30 years, but now I'm not sure. If anything happens to me..." The entry ended abruptly. Robert took the journal with trembling hands. "Dad died in a car accident 2 weeks after writing this." "It wasn't an accident," Agent Foster said quietly. "That's what triggered our investigation in the first place. We've been watching your family for months." The implications hit like a physical blow. Robert staggered and I grabbed his arm to steady him. "Your father was a great man," Agent Foster continued. "He discovered something he wasn't meant to see. Something about unauthorized technology transfers to foreign companies." The chaos in the lobby had transformed into stunned silence. "Dr. Chen," Agent Foster turned to me, "your sustainable packaging project may have uncovered more than just scientific breakthroughs. We believe Victoria and James's attempt to discredit you was about more than just family legacy or corporate control." "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Your research," she said grimly, "may have inadvertently exposed a decades-long international corporate espionage operation. And now that we have James in custody," she didn't need to finish the sentence. "This was no longer just about a mother-in-law's accusations or family drama. We had stumbled into something far darker, far more dangerous. As FBI and SEC agents swarmed the building, as reporters clamored for statements, as employees whispered and recorded, I looked at Robert. His face was ashen, his world crumbling around him. I took his hand. "We'll get through this." He squeezed back, but his eyes were on the security office where his mother was being held. "Will we?" The chaos that had erupted in our lobby that morning was just the beginning. As Agent Foster led us toward the elevators, I caught a glimpse of Victoria through the security office window. She sat ramrod straight, her face a mask of dignity. But as our eyes met, I saw something I'd never seen before in my mother-in-law's expression: fear. The 47th floor executive suite of Horizon Pharmaceuticals had been transformed into a command center. FBI agents commandeered the conference room. SEC investigators occupied empty offices, and 2 representatives from the Department of Justice set up laptops in Robert's corner office. Agent Foster stood at the head of the conference table, surrounded by evidence boards hastily erected in the last hour. Photos, documents, and sticky notes created a web of connections that grew more complex by the minute. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said, uncapping a marker. "Dr. Chen's sustainable packaging breakthrough threatened to expose decades of corporate espionage because it proved certain technologies were possible now that weren't in the 1990s, Bernard Winston finished. Victoria and James had been selling impossible research to foreign companies for years, claiming it was based on Richard's old work. But my project showed that the science they were selling couldn't have existed back then," I added, the pieces finally clicking into place. "It would have exposed their entire operation." Robert sat beside me, his tie loosened, his usual polished appearance showing cracks. "So they tried to discredit Sarah before she could present to the investors." "Not just discredit," Agent Foster corrected. "They needed to destroy her credibility completely. Make it look like she was the one stealing and selling secrets." A young FBI analyst burst into the room, tablet in hand. "Agent Foster, we found something in Victoria Chen's private server." He connected the tablet to the room's display screen. Emails appeared, hundreds of them, dating back over 20 years. "They weren't just selling fake research," the analyst explained. "They were selling real corporate secrets too, anything they could get their hands on. And look who was helping them." Names began scrolling across the screen. Board members, executives, scientists, a network spanning multiple companies, all funneling information through Victoria and James. Dear God, Patricia Martinez whispered. Half our senior management is implicated. The door opened again. This time it was Grace, accompanied by a forensic accountant. The money trail is incredible, the accountant announced. Offshore accounts, shell companies, fake charities. They've moved billions over the years. Agent Foster's phone buzzed. She checked it, her expression darkening. Victoria Chen is demanding. Her lawyer. And James? James is offering to talk. He'll implicate Mother, Robert said quietly. Try to save himself. A commotion outside drew our attention. Through the glass walls, we could see more FBI agents leading away Charles Peterson, our chief technology officer. He caught my eye as they passed, his face a mask of hatred. Peterson was their inside man, Agent Foster explained. He's been helping them access secure servers for years. The analyst cleared his throat. There's more. We found evidence that Richard Chen's death wasn't the only suspicious accident connected to this case. The room fell silent. On the screen, photographs appeared. Car crashes, a house fire, a boating accident. All involving people who might have discovered the truth. That's why Dad gave me his journal, Grace realized, her voice shaking. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't prove it. He was trying to protect the evidence. Another agent entered, this one carrying a stack of papers. Warrant just came through. We're seizing all company servers and personal devices. What about the investors? I asked suddenly, remembering the presentation that seemed a lifetime ago now. They're supposed to be here. They're not coming, Bernard said grimly. Because 3 of them were part of the scheme. The FBI arrested them an hour ago. Agent Foster stepped to the window, looking out over Boston's skyline. This is now officially the largest corporate espionage investigation in Massachusetts history. Dr. Chen, your sustainable packaging project didn't just threaten their current operation. It threatened to expose 20 years of criminal activity. And we would have gotten away with it too, a cold voice said from the doorway. Victoria Chen stood there, flanked by FBI agents, her lawyer hovering anxiously behind her. Despite everything, she still managed to look elegant in her Chanel suit. Mother, Robert started to rise, but she cut him off with a laugh. Oh, sit down, Robert, always so dramatic. She surveyed the room with disdain. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This goes far beyond one company, one family. Mrs. Chen, her lawyer cautioned, don't say another word. But Victoria was past caring. You think this is about corporate espionage? About selling secrets? This is about power, control, things your generation could never understand. Agent Foster stepped forward. Mrs. Chen, you have the right to remain silent. I have the right to protect what's mine. Victoria's composure cracked. Everything I did to maintain order, structure. Richard was weak. He wanted to give everything away, share his precious research with the world. Someone had to be practical. By selling fake research? I couldn't help asking. By having people killed? Victoria's eyes met mine, cold as winter. Accidents happen to people who don't understand their place. The room erupted in activity. Agents rushed to document her implicit confession. Her lawyer looked ready to faint. But I could only stare at this woman who had tried to destroy me, who had apparently been destroying people for decades. Take her to headquarters, Agent Foster ordered, and get me everything you can on these accidents. We're not just looking at corporate crime anymore. This is now a homicide investigation. As they led Victoria away, she paused at the door. Sarah, she called back, you really should have just played along. Family is so much more important than scientific integrity. Lie. Door closed behind her, leaving us in stunned silence. What happens now? Grace asked quietly. Agent Foster began gathering her materials. Now we unravel 20 years of corruption, fraud, and murder. Your father's company is about to be turned inside out. Every project, every patent, every deal will be scrutinized. And my research? I asked. Is probably the only clean thing in this building, she replied. Which is why they were so desperate to discredit you. You were the thread that, when pulled, unraveled their entire operation. Robert took my hand under the table. We'll rebuild, he said firmly. The right way this time. As federal agents continued their systematic takeover of Horizon Pharmaceuticals, I watched the sun setting over Boston. Somewhere out there, James Chen was probably already cutting a deal. More arrests would follow. More revelations would emerge. But for now, in this moment, I felt an odd sense of peace. The truth, as they say, had finally set us free. Even if that freedom came with a pair of handcuffs for some family members. The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching the atmosphere inside Horizon Pharmaceuticals. I sat in my lab, surrounded by the research that had inadvertently triggered a corporate earthquake. The prototype of our sustainable packaging sat on my desk, innocent-looking despite the chaos it had unleashed. A knock on the doorframe pulled me from my thoughts. Michael stood there holding 2 cups of coffee and a thick folder. You'll want to see this, he said, placing both on my desk. I've been going through the backup servers, the ones Victoria and James didn't know about. I opened the folder as Michael pulled up a chair. Inside were hundreds of pages of data logs, access records, and email transcripts. Look at the timestamps, he pointed. Every time Victoria or James accessed your files, every modified document, every deleted email, it's all here. And there's something else. He reached over and flipped to the last section. Remember those late-night lab sessions last summer, when the environmental controls kept malfunctioning? I nodded, the memory suddenly sharp. We'd lost weeks of testing because the temperature controls in our testing chamber kept failing. It wasn't a malfunction, Michael said grimly. Someone was manually overriding the systems, trying to sabotage your research. Before I could respond, Robert appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted but determined. The FBI found something in James's office, he announced. A complete playbook for discrediting you. They'd been planning this for months. He spread out documents across my desk, surveillance photos of me leaving work, entering our home, detailed notes about my schedule, my habits, lists of potential witnesses who could be bribed to support their accusations. They even had a backup plan, Robert continued. If the theft accusation didn't stick, they were going to claim you were selling company secrets to environmental activists. But why go to such lengths? I wondered aloud. Why not just... I trailed off, not wanting to say what we were all thinking. Because a scandal would be more effective than an accident, Agent Foster answered, entering the lab. They needed to destroy your credibility, not just remove you. She carried her own stack of files. We've been interviewing employees all morning. The picture that's emerging is disturbing. How so? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Victoria and James didn't just run a corporate espionage ring, Foster explained. They created a culture of fear and manipulation. People who questioned things had accidents. Those who played along were rewarded. Michael nodded. That's why I kept such detailed records. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't prove it. Your attention to detail probably saved Dr. Chen's career, Foster acknowledged, and possibly her life. A chill ran through me at her words. Robert moved closer, protective. We found this in Victoria's personal safe, Foster continued, pulling out a small notebook. It appears to be a ledger of sorts. Names, dates, payments, and consequences. She opened it to a marked page. There, in Victoria's elegant handwriting, was my name. Next to it, a series of options. Professional disgrace, criminal charges, laboratory accident last resort, car failure. They were escalating, Foster explained. If the theft accusation hadn't worked, they would have moved on to more permanent solutions, Robert finished, his voice hollow. The lab fell silent as we absorbed this. Everything I'd thought I knew about my family, my career, my life, it had all been built on quicksand. But then something caught my eye in the pile of documents. A familiar letterhead, Pharmatech's research division. Wait, I pulled it out. This memo, it's about their failed attempts at sustainable packaging, dated 3 months ago. Michael leaned in to look. After your breakthrough was announced, they were desperate. Foster nodded. Your success proved that their years of selling fake research was about to be exposed. They couldn't let that presentation happen. I stood up, suddenly energized. We need to go through everything. Every project, every patent. If they were selling fake research, there must be other scientists out there whose work was stolen or suppressed. Already on it, Foster gestured, and 2 FBI analysts entered with laptops. We're cross-referencing all of Horizon's patents with suspicious accidents or sudden project cancellations. I want to help, Michael said firmly. I know where all the old records are stored. Me too, Robert added. I have access to the board's private archives. Foster nodded. Good, because we're not just building a criminal case anymore. We're trying to restore scientific integrity to an entire industry. Over the next few hours, my lab transformed into an investigation hub. Analysts combed through data, Michael organized records, and Robert made calls to honest board members, building support for what would come next. By late afternoon, we had constructed a timeline on my whiteboard. 20 years of corruption, manipulation, and stolen innovation. Look at this pattern, I pointed out. Every time a researcher got close to a breakthrough that might expose their fraud, something happened to derail their work, Foster finished. But you were different. You succeeded before they could stop you. And now we can prove it, Michael added, holding up a drive. I found the original server logs. They tried to delete them, but you kept backups, I smiled at my assistant. Because you're brilliant. A commotion in the hallway drew our attention. Bernard Winston appeared, looking grimmer than ever. The board just received this. He held up his phone. Victoria's lawyers are threatening to expose everything. Every deal, every compromise, every person who looked the other way. They're trying to take the whole company down with her. Let them, I said firmly, surprising everyone. Let it all come out. We'll rebuild from the ashes. Robert took my hand. Sarah's right. This is our chance to clean house completely. To make Horizon what my father always wanted it to be. Foster's phone buzzed. She checked it, then looked up, with a slight smile. James just finished his statement, she announced. He's given us everything. Names, dates, accounts, and evidence that Victoria was behind Richard Chen's death. The room fell silent. Robert's hand tightened on mine. There's more, Foster continued. He's admitted to orchestrating several other accidents. With his testimony, we can finally get justice for all their victims. I looked around my lab, at the evidence of corruption spread across every surface, at the dedicated people working to expose the truth, at the prototype that had started it all. This isn't just about defending my work anymore, I realized. This is about defending everything science is supposed to stand for. Truth, innovation, progress. Foster nodded. Exactly. And with your help, we're going to make sure no one can corrupt that again. The defense of my reputation had become something much larger, a defense of scientific integrity itself. As we continued working into the evening, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Victoria had tried to destroy me to protect her criminal empire. Instead, she had inadvertently sparked its destruction. And in defending myself, I would help defend every scientist who had ever been silenced, suppressed, or scared into submission. The truth, as they say, would have its day in court. Just when We thought we had uncovered the full scope of Victoria and James's operation. Reality took an unexpected turn. I was reviewing evidence with Agent Foster in my lab when Patricia Martinez burst through the door, her normally composed demeanor shattered. "Turn on the news, now." Michael grabbed the remote for the lab's wall-mounted screen. The image flickered to life, showing a press conference outside Pharmatech's headquarters. But it wasn't the location that made us all freeze. It was the person at the podium. Dr. Helen Liu, Pharmatech's chief scientific officer, my former mentor. "The allegations against Victoria and James Chen are just the tip of the iceberg," she was saying, her voice steady, but her hands trembling. "What we're dealing with is a coordinated effort across multiple pharmaceutical companies to suppress revolutionary medical breakthroughs." The camera panned across a row of serious-faced executives standing behind her. I recognized CEOs and research directors from at least 5 major pharmaceutical companies. "For decades," Helen continued, "a shadow organization has been controlling which medical innovations reach the public. They call themselves the Conservation Council." Agent Foster's phone began buzzing incessantly. She stepped aside to take the call, her expression darkening with each word. "The sustainable packaging technology developed by Dr. Sarah Chen," Helen was saying, "threatened this organization not because it would expose fraudulent research, but because it would make life-saving medications accessible to millions who currently can't afford proper storage and transportation." Robert grabbed my arm. "Sarah, look at the man standing behind Helen." I squinted at the screen, then felt my blood run cold. There, partially hidden behind another executive, stood Thomas Walker, my PhD advisor from Stanford. "The Conservation Council," Helen explained, "believes that medical breakthroughs should be released slowly, controlled carefully, to maintain what they call market stability. In reality, they're artificially inflating prices and controlling who gets access to life-saving innovations." Agent Foster returned, her face grim. "It's being confirmed across multiple channels. The FBI has been investigating this council for years, but could never get enough evidence. Until now." Victoria and James weren't just selling corporate secrets. Patricia realized. They were enforcers for this council. Helen was still speaking. "We have evidence of the council's involvement in numerous accidents and scandals across the pharmaceutical industry. Any scientist who developed something that might disrupt their control. That's why they came after me so hard," I whispered. "My packaging technology would have made temperature-sensitive medications accessible in regions without reliable refrigeration. Cutting into their profit margins," Robert added bitterly. The screen split to show breaking news. FBI raids were happening simultaneously at pharmaceutical companies across the country. CEOs were being let out in handcuffs. Servers were being seized. Michael, who had been quietly working at his computer, suddenly stood up. "Dr. Chen, I found something in the encrypted files from Victoria's server. A list of council members. He projected it onto the lab wall. Hundreds of names scrolled past, executives, researchers, politicians, even judges." "Wait," Agent Foster said sharply. "Go back." Michael scrolled back up. There, in the middle of the list, was a name that made my heart stop. "Richard Chen." "No," Robert breathed. "That's impossible. Dad was fighting against them. They killed him." "Look at the annotation." Michael zoomed in. Next to Richard's name was a single word. "Eliminated." He was a member, I realized. But he turned against them. That's why he left those notes. That letter for me. He was trying to expose them. The lab door opened again. This time it was Grace, looking pale but determined. "I found more of Dad's journals," she announced. "Hidden behind a false wall in his study. You need to see this." She opened a weathered notebook to a marked page. Richard's handwriting was frantic, urgent. "The council has gone too far. Suppressing innovations was bad enough, but now they're actively destroying research that could save lives." I can't be part of this anymore. Victoria doesn't understand, or doesn't want to understand, what we've become. I've gathered evidence, hidden copies in secure locations. If anything happens to me—" The entry ended abruptly. "He was building a case against them," Grace said softly. "But Victoria and James found out." On the screen, Helen was wrapping up her press conference. "We're releasing all the suppressed research today. Hundreds of innovations that could change millions of lives. The Council's reign of control is over." Agent Foster's phone buzzed again. She listened briefly, then addressed us. "Victoria just heard about the press conference. She's offering to tell us everything about the Council in exchange for considerations in her case." "Too late," Robert said firmly. "Let her face the full consequences." Another FBI agent rushed in. "We found a hidden room in the Chen mansion's basement, some kind of command center. Decades of records, surveillance equipment, everything. The SAT. Council's local headquarters." Foster nodded. "Victoria wasn't just an enforcer, she was a regional director." I looked at the prototype on my desk. The simple innovation that had inadvertently cracked open decades of corruption and conspiracy. All this, I gestured at the chaos around us, because they couldn't let people have access to affordable medication storage. "Power," Robert said quietly, echoing his mother's words from earlier. It was always about power. The news was now showing footage of raids across the globe. The Council's international network was being dismantled in real time. Helen appeared on screen again, this time addressing a question about next steps. "We're establishing an independent oversight committee," she announced, "to ensure that medical innovations reach those who need them most, and we're starting with Dr. Chen's sustainable packaging technology." I felt a strange mix of emotions: vindication, grief, determination. My mother-in-law hadn't just been trying to protect her family's legacy. She'd been protecting a system of control that had cost countless lives. "Dr. Chen," Agent Foster said, "we'll need your help understanding the technical aspects of all this. The cases against Council members will hinge on proving they deliberately suppressed viable innovations." I nodded, already thinking about all the researchers like me who had been silenced, all the breakthroughs that had been buried. The twist in our story had revealed something far darker than family drama or corporate espionage. But it had also revealed something else: the power of truth to shatter even the most entrenched systems of control. As Helen finished her press conference with a quote from Richard's journals, I realized that my father-in-law's legacy would live on after all, not in patents or profits, but in the final exposure of a conspiracy he had died trying to reveal. The real work was just beginning. In the days following Helen Liu's bombshell press conference, Horizon Pharmaceuticals transformed into ground zero for a global investigation. The FBI converted our entire 45th floor into a command center, with teams working around the clock to unravel the Conservation Council's web of corruption. I sat in what used to be the executive boardroom, now filled with evidence boards and computer stations, helping Agent Foster's team decode years of technical documents. The scope of the Council's influence was staggering. "Look at this," I said, pulling up a file on my laptop. Every time a researcher got close to a breakthrough in low-cost drug delivery systems, their funding would mysteriously dry up. Their data would become corrupted. Their labs would have accidents. Agent Foster leaned over my shoulder, frowning. "Can you prove these innovations would have worked?" "That's the brilliant part of their scheme," Robert interjected, spreading out more documents. "Mother and the Council didn't just suppress the research. They modified it, made small changes to ensure the projects would fail, then used those failures to justify maintaining the status quo." A young FBI analyst rushed in, clutching a tablet. "We found something in the mansion's command center, video archives going back decades." The footage he pulled up made my blood run cold. There was Richard Chen, alive and younger, sitting at a council meeting. Victoria sat beside him, along with faces we now recognized as council leaders from around the world. "We must maintain control," someone was saying. "These new delivery systems would destabilize entire markets." Richard stood, up, his face troubled. "People are dying because they can't afford proper medication storage. We have a moral obligation." "We have an obligation to order," Victoria cut him off. "To stability." "Richard, dear, you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment." The video jumped to another meeting, months later. Richard looked more haggard, more determined. "I'm releasing my research," he announced. "All of it. The council can't stop progress forever." Victoria's face in the video was a mask of cold fury. 2 weeks later, Richard Chen died in his car accident. They recorded everything. The analyst explained. "Every meeting, every decision, every elimination." Agent Foster's phone buzzed. "The Singapore team just checked in. They found Helen Liu's original research from 20 years ago, the same technology Victoria accused you of stealing. It matches your work's foundation exactly." "Because great minds think alike," Helen's voice came from the doorway. My former mentor looked exhausted but resolute. "When the council suppressed my research, they never imagined another scientist would approach the problem from the same angle." She walked over to examine our evidence boards. "But Sarah did, and she improved on my original design in ways I never considered." "That's why they panicked," Robert realized. "Your success didn't just threaten their control, it proved that suppressed innovations would eventually resurface." Michael appeared with another stack of files. "Dr. Chen, I found something in the old lab records. Every time you ran into an equipment malfunction or data corruption, there was unauthorized access to our systems from a terminal in the mansion's command center." "Victoria was sabotaging the research personally," I said, the realization hitting hard. "She didn't trust anyone else to do it. The investigation was spreading. Teams across the globe were uncovering similar command centers, each with its own archive of suppressed innovations and eliminated researchers." Grace burst in, her artist's eye having proved invaluable in spotting patterns in the council's visual data. "The philanthropy angle, it wasn't just for show. They were using charitable foundations to track potential threats. Any researcher who applied for certain grants would be flagged for surveillance." "Classic honey trap," Agent Foster nodded. "Offer funding to identify promising innovations, then ensure those innovations never see light of day." A senior FBI agent entered, his face grave. "We found the accident files, detailed plans for every researcher they eliminated, including my father," Robert finished quietly. The agent nodded. "The council had a 3-tier system. First, they'd try to buy cooperation. Then, they'd attempt professional destruction. If those failed, they made problems disappear permanently," Helen finished. "I always wondered why so many brilliant researchers had fatal accidents just before major breakthroughs." I pulled up another file, a comprehensive list of the council's interventions over the past 30 years. The numbers were staggering. "Over 300 researchers eliminated," I read aloud. "Thousands of innovations suppressed, millions of lives affected." "And that's just what we know about," Agent Foster added. "Many accidents probably weren't even recorded." Robert, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "There's something else. Something we're missing." He pointed to a pattern in the data. "Look at the timing of these interventions. They spike every few years, coinciding with patent expirations," I finished, seeing it too. They weren't just suppressing new innovations. They were eliminating alternatives before existing patents expired. "Maintaining monopolies," Helen nodded, "keeping prices artificially high." Agent Foster immediately got on her phone, calling in more analysts. This was bigger than anyone had imagined. "Dr. Chen," she said after hanging up, "we need you to head a technical review team. Go through every suppressed innovation, identify what's still viable. The Justice Department wants to fast-track development of critical technologies. I looked at the prototype on the conference table, my sustainable packaging system that had sparked this investigation. We'll need a secure facility, I said. The council still has members we haven't identified. They'll try to stop us. Already arranged, Foster replied. We're setting up a protected research center. Helen will co-lead with you. Helen smiled. Just like old times. But this time, no one will stop our work. As the investigation expanded, revealing more layers of the council's control, I realized we weren't just exposing past crimes. We were dismantling a system designed to prioritize profit over human life. The question was, how many more surprises would we uncover before this was over? Looking at the evidence boards, the files, the videos, at decades of suppressed innovation and eliminated innovators, I knew one thing for certain. This investigation was about to change not just the pharmaceutical industry, but the entire landscape of global healthcare. And somewhere, I hoped, Richard Chen was watching his life's work finally come to fruition. A week into the global investigation of the Conservation Council, I received an encrypted email that changed everything. I was working late in the secure research facility, reviewing suppressed innovations with Helen, when my secure terminal chimed. The sender, Richard Chen. That's impossible, Helen said, looking over my shoulder. Richard's been dead for 2 years. But there it was, an email scheduled to send automatically after a specific sequence of events. The message was brief. If you're reading this, the council has been exposed. Check the 3rd floor of Boston University Medical Library, section R317. What you'll find there will reveal the true architect of everything. Richard Agent Foster dispatched a team immediately. Within an hour, they found it. A hidden cache of documents concealed behind a loose panel. But what they contained was more shocking than anyone expected. This goes back to the 1960s, Agent Foster explained as we examined the files in our secure room. Before Victoria, before the council, it started with one man, Dr. Maxwell Sterling. The name hit Robert like a physical blow. Sterling? As in Sterling Pharmaceuticals? The company that merged with your father's to create Horizon, Helen confirmed. But that's not all. Look at this. She pointed to a family tree diagram. There, connected by a line to Maxwell Sterling's name, was Victoria's maiden name. She was his daughter, I whispered. Victoria Sterling Chen. The pieces started falling into place. The council hadn't been created by pharmaceutical companies. It had been created by one man to control them. Victoria wasn't just an enforcer. She was carrying on her father's legacy. There's more, Agent Foster said grimly. Sterling didn't just want to control medical innovations. He wanted to reshape the entire global healthcare system. The documents revealed a multi-generational plan. Phase 1. Gain control of major pharmaceutical companies through mergers and acquisitions. Phase 2. Establish the council to suppress disruptive innovations. Phase 3. Create artificial scarcity of critical medications to maintain power. But look at the date on Phase 3, Michael pointed out. 2 months from now, Robert grabbed the document. They were planning something big. Something that would... He trailed off as his phone buzzed. The color drained from his face as he read the message. Mothers escaped custody. The room erupted into activity. Agent Foster barked orders into her phone. FBI teams mobilized. But I was still reading the Phase 3 documents, my horror growing. They were going to create a global medication shortage, I realized. Use it to justify centralizing control of all pharmaceutical production under council-controlled companies. Causing prices to skyrocket, Helen added. Making life-saving medications accessible only to those they deemed worthy. Grace burst into the room. The mansion's command center just went active. Someone's accessing the systems. Victoria's not working alone, Agent Foster said. The real power behind the council is still out there. As if on cue, every screen in the room flickered to life. A face appeared, elderly but sharp-eyed, radiating authority. "Hello, Sarah," Maxwell Sterling said. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." He was supposed to be dead, had been declared dead 15 years ago, but here he was, very much alive. "I must admit, you've caused quite a disruption to our plans," he continued. "Just like Richard did when he discovered the truth. Though I had hoped Victoria could handle you more efficiently." "Where is she?" Robert demanded. Sterling smiled. "My daughter is exactly where she needs to be, completing what I started 60 years ago." Suddenly, alerts began blaring across the facility. "Security breaches! System failures! Check the backup servers!" Michael shouted. But it was too late. Across the globe, council-controlled facilities were initiating some kind of protocol. "What you're witnessing," Sterling explained calmly, "is the culmination of decades of planning. Victoria isn't just escaping. She's implementing Phase 3, ahead of schedule." The alerts kept coming. Manufacturing plants shutting down, storage facilities going dark, transportation systems failing. "My God," Helen breathed. "They're creating the shortage now, using our investigation as cover." "Did you really think Victoria worked alone?" Sterling asked. "That the council was just a group of corrupt executives? We are the architects of order, and sometimes order requires sacrifice." Agent Foster's phone was buzzing constantly now. Reports of facilities being sabotaged worldwide, critical medications vanishing from supply chains. "You would let millions die," I said, my voice shaking with rage, "just to maintain control." "To maintain stability," Sterling corrected. "Victoria understood that. Richard never did. And now, thanks to your meddling, we've had to accelerate our plans." Robert slammed his fist on the table. "Our father died trying to stop you." "Your father died because he chose chaos over order," Sterling replied. "Just as Sarah will die unless she makes a wiser choice." The screens went dark. In the silence that followed, we could hear distant sirens. "We need to stop them," I said. "The council, Sterling, Victoria, all of them." "But how?" Grace asked. "They've had decades to plan this." I looked at my sustainable packaging prototype, the innovation that had started all this. They have one weakness, I realized. They're so focused on controlling existing systems that they never considered someone might create entirely new ones. Helen caught on immediately. "Our combined research, your packaging, my delivery systems, could bypass their entire infrastructure," I finished. "Create a completely independent distribution network." Agent Foster was already making calls. "I'll get you whatever resources you need, but we have to move fast." The true culprit had finally revealed himself. Maxwell Sterling, the man behind the council, behind Victoria, behind decades of suppressed innovation and controlled suffering. He had shown us his face, thinking victory was assured, but he had made one crucial mistake. He had revealed the full scope of his plans to a room full of people dedicated to stopping him. Now, we just had to figure out how to do it before his phase. 3 destroyed millions of lives. Robert gripped my hand. "We'll finish what Dad started." Looking around at our team, Helen, Michael, Grace, Agent Foster, I knew we had a chance. Sterling had spent decades building a system of control. We had 72 hours to tear it down. The secure facility buzzed with frantic energy as we raced against Sterling's Phase 3 protocol. Screens displayed real-time data of medical supply, chains failing across the globe. But something about the pattern nagged at me. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, mapping failure points on a digital globe. "The disruptions, they're too precise." Helen leaned over my shoulder, her eyes narrowing. "You're right. They're not just shutting down facilities. they're creating specific shortages in specific regions. "Look at this," Michael called from his station. He'd overlaid our map with population data. "The shortages align perfectly with demographic data." Agent Foster strode over, phone pressed to her ear. She ended her call abruptly when she saw our screens. "They're targeting populations," she realized. "Not just creating general scarcity." Robert burst in, clutching a stack of newly decoded documents from Sterling's library cache. "It's worse than that. Look what I found in my grandfather's early papers." He spread them across the table. Eugenics research, population control theories, social engineering protocols. Sterling wasn't just trying to control medical access, Robert said, his voice tight. He was trying to reshape humanity itself. Grace, who had been quiet since Sterling's revelation, suddenly spoke up. "The Council's charitable foundations. I always wondered why they focused on specific regions, specific communities." "They were identifying test populations," Helen finished, grimly. "Using medical access as a tool for social engineering." My computer pinged with an incoming secure message. The sender, Victoria Chen. Should I open it? I asked Agent Foster. She nodded, activating additional security protocols. Carefully. The message contained only an audio file and coordinates. I played the recording. "Hello, Sarah." Victoria's voice was calm, collected. "By now, you've probably realized what's really happening. Daddy Dearest always did love his dramatic revelations." A pause, then. "But he didn't tell you everything. The coordinates I've sent. Go there. Alone. You'll find what Richard discovered the day he died. The truth that's bigger than all of us." "It's a trap," Robert said immediately. "Obviously." I agreed. "But look at these coordinates." They pointed to an abandoned medical research facility outside Boston, one of the first buildings Richard Chen had purchased when starting his company. "Wait," Helen said suddenly. "I know that facility. I did my early research there before the council shut it down. There was something in the basement. We need to check it out," I decided. "Not alone," Agent Foster countered. "We'll send a team." "No," I interrupted. "Victoria will have surveillance. If she sees a team approach, we'll lose whatever's hidden there." Robert gripped my hand. "Then I'm going with you." "Both of you will have remote monitoring and a backup team nearby," Foster insisted. "But first, we need to stabilize these supply chains before people start dying." I turned to Helen and Michael. "Can you implement the emergency distribution network we designed?" Helen nodded. "Using your packaging system and my delivery protocols, we can establish independent supply lines within 24 hours. "Do it," Foster ordered. "I'll coordinate with international authorities." As the team mobilized, Robert and I prepared to visit the old facility. But Grace stopped us at the door. "There's something else," she said, pulling out her father's journal. "Something I found hidden in the binding." She carefully extracted a micro SD card. Michael quickly secured it and accessed its contents. What we found made us all stop breathing for a moment. Video footage from Richard's last day alive. He was in the basement of that old facility, recording on his phone. "If you're seeing this," he said, looking haunted, "I've found evidence of Project Genesis. It's not just about controlling medical access. Sterling, he's been using the Council's network to test experimental treatments. Genetic modifications. They're trying to create some kind of evolutionary bottleneck." The video cut out abruptly. "That's why they had to eliminate him immediately," Robert whispered. He'd found their real endgame. Agent Foster was already making calls. "I'm getting CDC and WHO involvement. If they're running unauthorized genetic trials, they're not." "Trials?" Helen interrupted, reading through more decoded files. "Their implementations, the medication shortages, the targeted disruptions, their delivery systems for whatever they've developed." My mind raced. The Sustainable Packaging Project. That's why they really wanted to stop it. Not just because it would disrupt their control, But because it would let people test what they were being given, Michael finished. Victoria's message suddenly made more sense. She wasn't just leading us to evidence, she was leading us to active research. We need to move now, I said. Whatever's in that facility could expose everything, Robert nodded. No wonder Sterling chose to reveal himself. He's already implementing their final phase. As we prepared to leave, Helen grabbed my arm. Sarah, be careful. If Richard's right about Project Genesis, we're not just dealing with corporate corruption or medical access, I finished. We're dealing with forced human evolution. Agent Foster handed us secure communications equipment. Backup team will be 5 minutes out. Any sign of trouble? We'll be careful, Robert promised. As we drove toward the facility, I couldn't help thinking about how this had all started, with a simple accusation of theft in my workplace. Now we were racing to stop a decades-long conspiracy to reshape humanity itself. Dad tried to warn everyone, Robert said quietly, but he ran out of time. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. We won't. The old facility loomed ahead, dark against the setting sun. Somewhere inside was the evidence Richard Chen died trying to expose. The deeper truth behind the council's activities, and possibly my mother-in-law, waiting to reveal why she had finally chosen to break ranks with her father's master plan. The truth, it seemed, was darker than any of us had imagined. But we were about to shine a light into that darkness, no matter the cost. Time to find out what Project Genesis really was, and how to stop it before it changed humanity forever. The basement of Richard Chen's old facility held more horrors than we could have imagined. As Robert and I descended the dimly lit stairs, our flashlights revealed walls of cryogenic storage units, each containing thousands of genetic samples. Welcome to Project Genesis, Victoria's voice echoed from the shadows. She stepped into the light, looking somehow both defeated and defiant. Daddy's magnum opus, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Maxwell Sterling himself, surrounded by armed security. I had hoped Victoria would convince you to join us, Sterling said, his voice eerily calm. After all, you've proven yourself quite adaptable. By surviving your attempts to destroy me? I asked. Sterling smiled. By showing the kind of resilience we're trying to engineer into the human race. He gestured to the storage units. Every medication the Council has distributed for the past decade contained markers, genetic triggers, waiting to be activated. Phase 3 isn't just about creating shortages, it's about activating those markers in chosen populations. You're insane, Robert stepped forward. You can't just reshape humanity. Can I? Sterling pressed a button on his tablet. Screens around the room flickered to life, showing medical data from around the world. It's already begun. The supply chain disruptions are introducing the catalysts. Within weeks, the changes will be irreversible. Victoria suddenly moved, placing herself between us and her father. Except for one thing. She pulled out a drive. Richard didn't just find evidence, he created a kill switch. Sterling's composure cracked. Victoria, what are you doing? What I should have done when Richard first showed me the truth, she said. Before you had him killed, my husband died trying to stop this madness. She turned to me. I didn't bring you here to recruit you, Sarah. I brought you here because you're the only one who can implement the kill switch. Your sustainable packaging research. It's not just about preservation. It's about neutralizing the markers. Gunfire erupted from above. Agent Foster's voice crackled through our earpieces. Teams moving in. Get to cover. What followed was chaos. Sterling security engaged with FBI teams. Victoria threw me the drive as Sterling lunged for her. Robert pulled me behind a storage unit as bullets flew. The central terminal, Victoria shouted before her father dragged her away. Upload the kill switch. Through the firefight, I ran. For the terminal, Robert covering me. The drive contained Richard's final project, a molecular cleanup protocol disguised as a packaging innovation. That's why they were so desperate to stop your research, Robert realized as I typed frantically. You weren't just making medications more accessible. I was unknowingly developing the antidote, I finished. Sterling broke free from the chaos, charging toward us. You'll destroy decades of work! We're saving humanity from your twisted vision, I countered, hitting the final key. The system activated. Around the world, our enhanced packaging protocols began neutralizing Sterling's genetic markers. The Council's master plan, undone by the very innovation they had tried to suppress. Victoria appeared one last time, restraining her father as FBI agents swarmed in. I'm sorry, she said, looking at Robert, for everything. Your father would be proud of you both. The aftermath unfolded over months. Sterling and the Council's leadership faced international tribunals. Victoria's cooperation earned her a lighter sentence, though reconciliation with our family would take much longer. Horizon Pharmaceuticals underwent a complete transformation. Robert and I worked with Helen to establish new protocols for medical, innovation, and distribution. The company became a leader in accessible healthcare, just as Richard had always dreamed. Grace turned her father's journals into a powerful documentary, exposing the Council's decades of manipulation. She and Michael, who had grown closer during the investigation, started a watchdog organization monitoring pharmaceutical ethics. Agent Foster's task force evolved into a permanent oversight committee, ensuring no organization could ever again amass the kind of power the Council had wielded. 1 year later, I stood in my old lab, now part of the Robert Chen Center for Medical Innovation. The sustainable packaging system that had started everything was helping deliver affordable medications to previously unreachable parts of the world. Ready for the ceremony? Robert asked, entering with Grace. Today, we were dedicating a new wing of the center, focused on transparent research and ethical innovation. The plaque would bear Richard's name, along with all the researchers who had died trying to expose the truth. Victoria, now serving house arrest, had been granted permission to attend. Our relationship would never be warm, but we had reached an understanding. She had chosen truth over power in the end. You know, Grace said, examining my latest project blueprints. Dad used to say that the biggest breakthroughs come from asking simple questions. I smiled, remembering how this had all started, with a simple accusation in my workplace, escalating into a conspiracy that had nearly reshaped humanity. The simplest question of all, I replied, is who benefits? That's what exposed the Council. That's what drives us now. Robert took my hand as we headed to the ceremony. From now on, the answer to that question will always be everyone. The new Horizon Pharmaceuticals stood as proof that innovation didn't need to be controlled to be valuable, that progress didn't require sacrifice, that truth, no matter how deeply buried, finds its way to light, and if Victoria Chen ever again appears in someone's workplace with accusations, well, let's just say the world is watching much more carefully now. Some family legacies are worth destroying. Others, like Richard's dream of accessible healthcare for all, are worth fighting to protect. In the end, we had managed to do both. The simple truth had defeated decades of elaborate lies, and that perhaps was the biggest breakthrough of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.